Now, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has endorsed Ebrahim Raisi as the new president of Iran. Raisi will be sworn in today. For more on that, our correspondent Ehsan Kevani is joining us live from Tehran. Ehsan, hello there. What can we expect at the swearing ceremony?
High-ranking officials have been invited from dozens of foreign countries. However, the attendance will be more limited this year due to pandemic restrictions. Tehran airport will be closed for a few hours in the afternoon, and high security measures have been in place around the parliament building since yesterday. It seems that today in the ceremony, Raisi will submit his cabinet to the lawmakers, although he's got 2 weeks' time. The supreme leader has advised him to form and submit the cabinet as soon as possible, because Raisi will have a super busy schedule to take care of both domestic and foreign affairs, in fact.
About this election, official figures show turnout in the presidential election was 48.8%. It is actually the lowest in any presidential race since 1979 revolution. And Raisi has promised to lift sanctions and also improve public trust. So there should be some major challenges facing him. What are they?
That's right. In fact, what he has promised in his campaigns is to reconstruct Iran's economy and manufacturing sector, as well as to boost exports and harness the skyrocketing inflation rate in Iran. Regarding sanctions, he says if the U.S. does not lift sanctions and for any reason the revival of the JCPOA cannot be realized, Iran must use its domestic potentials without relying on possible results of the negotiations. But in reality, sanctions have paralyzed Iran's economy and its international trade. Even if the sanctions are lifted and removed, Raisi faces huge challenges to improve an economy which is wounded by years of sanctions and also systematic corruption within the administration and lack of international investment. Many Iranians expect him to fight corruption within the administration as his very first move, plus his effort to supply vaccine to tackle pandemic in Iran. We need to see what he will do within the next 4 years to improve Iran's economy.
After spending 8 years of harsh economic pressures during President Rouhani, the Iranian nation is waiting for a new president to take office. Raisi, who has vowed huge reforms in industry and economy, as well as his promised fight against state corruption, will inherit an economy with an inflation of 43%, unemployment rate at 10%, and economic growth at less than 1%. The main reasons for the current stricken economy are years of sanctions and the country's inability to sell oil in the international markets, plus poor performance in the industry sector by the recent administrations. But can people be optimistic about the new administration's moves?
We must alleviate people's concerns and relieve their pain and suffering. By relying on the current possibilities and our great young workforce, we must turn frustration into hope.
Many experts believe a boost in the country's economy could be expected, but such hope depends on some fundamental factors.
So people would like the economy to improve. They obviously want more jobs, higher income, and lower inflation. But I think there are two major factors that will determine the economic trajectory over the next 4 years. The first one is the US and Iran negotiations over the revival of the JCPOA. And the second one, which I think is as important, is how the new government will form its economic team.
Raisi's economic priorities include harnessing inflation, boosting economic growth, and increasing non-petroleum exports. However, Each of these goals require fundamental actions as well as favorable political conditions. Despite all the obstacles in the way of the president-elect to reconstruct Iran's economy, Iranian people hope they can experience higher purchasing power and better living standards. Ehsan Kayvani, CGTN, Tehran, Iran.
And here is a brief introduction to Ebrahim Raisi, the newly elected president of Iran.
Ebrahim Raisi was born in 1960. He is a cleric who continued to rise within Iran's judicial system following Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's accession to the supreme leadership in 1989. He later acted as a prosecutor of Tehran, then headed the General Inspection Organization, and then served as Deputy Chief Justice for a decade until 2014. In the 2017 elections, Raisi was the main opponent of then-President Hassan Rouhani. He called his nomination a religious and a revolutionary responsibility to run. In 2019, Raisi was appointed by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as Judiciary Chief. The task was to enhance the country's fight against corruption. Raisi is frequently mentioned as a likely successor to Khamenei when he passes away. In June this year, Raisi was elected the 8th president since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. He has promised to improve the economic conditions which have been seriously affected by U.S. sanctions and the COVID-19 pandemic.
And for more on this, Professor Wang Jin is joining us from Xi'an. He's a specialist in the Middle Eastern Studies at China's Northwest University. Wang Jin, welcome to Global Watch. Well, first of all, how will the Raisi administration affect nuclear talks and also relations with the U.S.?
I think the new Iranian government's attitudes towards the nuclear talk depends on both Raisi himself perception as well as the United States perception over Raisi's administration, because the negotiation is not determined by one side, but determines the attitudes from the both sides, especially Tehran and the United States. Given the attitude that he expressed during the election campaign, and the recent weeks that Raisi is willing to continue the talks with the United States and also the Iranian nuclear related parties, and hope to facilitate the maintenance of the nuclear the mechanism. So that's why I think it is very necessary and highly important for the international society to encourage the dialogue and the negotiation channels in the future, especially between Tehran and Washington. Tony.
Right, and there is sort of coincidence lately. Raisi is taking power in the country just days after the U.S., the United Kingdom and Israel accused Iran of using a drone to target an oil tanker linked to an Israeli businessman. 2 crew members were killed in this incident, a British national and also a Romanian national. Of course, Iran has rejected all the allegations, but is this just a coincidence?
I think it might be a coincidence, or it might not, because a lot of the details has not been revealed by Israel, by the United States, although they have already accused Iran's responsibility for the attack. But there were still a lot of details that is still unknown. But I think the allegation behind the allegation is United States and Israel and other, for example, Great Britain's their willingness to hope to organize a kind of regional allies to constrain Iran's influence and try to create the kind of the negative image over Iran's nuclear new administration and set up the obstacles for the nuclear dialogues in the future. So I think a lot of distrust, a lot of the divisions, and a lot of rivalry is still there between United States and Iran, between Israel and Iran. So I think that's why negotiation and dialogue are very highly necessary, and to bring peace and stability and trust back to the region, back to Middle East. Tony.
Thank you very much, Wang Jin, a professor from the Middle East Studies.